Don't be the freelance writer who starts their onboarding process too late in the game. We want to make sure that we start onboarding a potential client by making sure they're a fit first. We're not trying to onboard everybody, we're trying to onboard the right fit. So, I'm going to give you a bunch of different steps to take to onboard your clients and build those long term relationships and have ongoing work. But you need to pay attention that we just don't want to take everybody on the bus. We want the right people on the bus. So we don't want to start late in the game, and we want to be particular about who's on the bus. I'm Mandy Ellis. I'm a six-figure freelance writer who has helped other freelance writers build high-earning businesses they adore without the stress, burnout, and overwhelm. And I'm going to walk you through a bunch of steps today. So number one of these things is you need to filter your inbound leads. This is what I call diamond clients. You need to dig for diamond clients. So when you're getting inbound leads, meaning clients are reaching out to you, you don't get on calls with all of them. You just email them a set number of questions to answer before you get on a call to make sure they're the right fit. Because we want to start the onboarding / relationship building process when we get on a call. We don't want to be building relationships or wasting precious scheduled time on calls with clients who are not a good fit for us. So when you get an inbound lead in, I like to ask, what's your project, right? If they don't email you like what the project is, tell me what your project is, what's your budget, what's your timeline, and what other things you have going on in the pipeline. Those are your minimum questions. If you want some more questions that you should ask on your initial call or your initial email, grab my free seasoned veteran cheat sheet. It's mandyellis.com/cheat sheet that gives you a bunch more questions to ask to filter out the right inbound leads to get on calls with so that you can make sure you're onboarding those diamond clients. So you can go to mandyellis.com/cheat sheet to grab it. But you can have these questions that you send via email, or you can create a standalone web page. So I had this page that I had up that had my brand values, testimonials, past projects I worked on, niches I was in, and then a bunch of different types of projects I worked on with some ballpark pricing. And at the very end of that page, and this page is not searchable by Google, so that I could only send it when I wanted to, it had a calendar to schedule a call with me. So if everything on that page looked good, then they could schedule a call. I want to be very careful about where I'm spending my time. So in the beginning, I recommend that you just ask some questions via email to make sure you're getting on the right calls. After a while of you kind of like getting used to that and knowing what you're looking for and really having those specific attributes of your diamond clients, and this is something that I go over very in depth with my runway and my wealth lab students, but you have those specific characteristics of your specific ideal diamond clients, then you can start creating that web page where you get an inbound lead and you're like, hey, here's this web page. If everything looks good, schedule a call. And it makes it a lot quicker because people will self-select out. So instead of them getting on a call and wasting your time, or you realize they're a tire kicker, or that they're not the type of client you want, or you're just not a personality fit, you have this web page to do it for you. So when you're filtering these inbound leads, this also means that you need to filter your outbound, right? So your LOIs that you're sending, those letters of introduction that you're sending out to potential clients. This filtering process to find your diamond clients is really good too. So we're filtering our inbound leads by either asking them questions via email, or we have our standalone web page that's not searchable by Google to send to people, and we're filtering the clients that we're emailing our LOIs out to, or sending those via LinkedIn in mail. Those are really important, kind of two-pronged approach. We need to filter, filter, filter. This is something that I harp on so much with my students as we go through the different blueprint processes, like the proven things that I teach them, because it is key to wearing your new pair of glasses so you can identify diamond clients by saying yes, 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 no, yes, no. It's very quick to start identifying them because you know what you're looking for. So if you can kind of put that into both your inbound process where people are emailing you and your outbound where you're sending things out like LOIs, that will make a huge difference in your business. Number two. Now, if you are onboarding properly, you need to do some things that will take you out of your comfort zone. One of those things is pricing. I always, always, always recommend that you pick a number that makes you feel a little bit nervous. This ensures that you're not leaving money on the table and you're also pushing yourself out of your boundaries. So instead of you setting rates and then being like, well, I hope this works, I want you to pick numbers you feel a little bit nervous about. So when you hear a client's budget, we want to see if we're playing the same game. We're not going into their budget to say like, whatever they said, the max amount is it. That's not it. We're hearing their budget to make sure that they also think $2,000 for, this guide makes sense. And then I want you, if you're like, let's say they don't give you a budget number, I want you to pick a number that makes you feel a little bit nervous when you send that proposal, because it's really, really good for you moving up in your pricing, aligning with the right clients, making sure you're not leaving money on the table, and proving to yourself that you can get paid well for your work. I also have a free pricing guide. So if you go to mandyellis.com/pricing guide, you can pick that up, and that will give you dozens and dozens and dozens of projects to help you price in the range that makes sense for you. So if you go to mandyellis.com/pricing guide, you can grab it. But the key here is that whenever you're setting your rates, like I like to kind of have an idea of a ballpark of set rates that I like for certain projects. But when you get a client's budget, and let's say they're asking for 4 different things. They want, a guide, an infographic, a case study, and a white paper. You have kind of a ballpark in your head, but that total project number should be a number that makes you a little bit nervous. So we want to make sure we're kind of pushing our boundaries, because 99.999% of writers way undercharge. And I don't want to continue perpetuating the idea that, like, we should just keep kind of like, oh, well, what do they say? And what should we do? And no, you need to pick the number that makes you a little bit nervous. So there's lots of high paying clients out there. There isn't this like lack of high paying clients. It's your ability to filter and go find them, and then your ability to charge appropriately for your work. So you want to make sure that you're doing both those things. Number three, you need to ask a lot of questions on your client calls. You need to be a questioner. If you've ever read Gretchen Rubin's book, about the 4 different kind of personalities, I'm a questioner. I think questioners are what most writers are, because we're very curious and interested. But you need to ask a lot of questions on your client calls, because you need to know what's going on. Like, are we a personality fit? Are we a fit on scope of work? Are we a fit on budget? Are we a fit on timeline? Do they have other work in the pipeline? So asking a lot of questions on those calls defines the project, defines the proposal, but it also defines your working relationship and your boundaries and how they treat you, and the personality and how they communicate. So we want to make sure that we are asking a lot of questions, but we're also listening. So listen first. I like to listen first so that I can respond, but then I also ask a lot of questions so that I can kind of reinforce the boundaries, but also kind of set expectations and have them understand what it's like to work with me. These things I think are really important for onboarding, because it helps you weed out the right clients. If you're asking a bunch of questions and they're getting annoyed, or they're like, why would you need to know that? That's not your client. Or they're like, well, we need it yesterday, and like, you should just do it because you're the writer, or like, you figure it out. They're not your client. Or if you hear something like, I'll know when I see it, they're not your client. You need to ask a lot of questions, and good clients will be like, that makes sense. Those questions and their answers, and your ability to listen and, actually understand what they're saying in terms of like working with them, their personality, all that stuff, and respond, that helps you onboard the right clients and set expectations for next steps, which are number 4, your proposal contract invoice. So now that we've kind of filtered people out in this process, we're getting to the part where the next step is, after the call, is we're sending a proposal contract invoice. I like Dubsado for this, and I will put a little video here for Dubsado where I walked through how I use it. But you want to make sure that you have a legally binding signature tool for your contract, but also that you're able to send it all as one thing. That's what I really like about Dubsado, is I send one link and it shows them the proposal, the contract, and the invoice. So when I leave the call, I let them know that, hey, I'm going to send you a proposal. It includes all the stuff we talked about plus pricing. If that looks good, you can sign the contract, and then you can pay the upfront payment. All of that stuff has been discussed on the call. There's no new information. So sending the proposal contract invoice shouldn't be a surprise. They should know exactly what they're getting, how it works, where it's coming from. It's coming from Dubsado. And how all these different pieces are like of onboarding work, like when they're working with me or partnering with me. So I like the idea of giving those things all at once, because if they have questions on any of those things, I can handle that with one email instead of an email for a proposal, and then, okay, let me send you the contract, and then let me send you the invoice. They can go at their own pace, and it usually gets contracts signed quicker and payment made quicker. So we want to make sure all those things are in place. And the proposal contract invoice is a really good way for you to prepare your clients on the call and onboard them, because then you'll get an answer of like, oh no, like, we don't do contracts. Or they'll tell you like, oh, we'll send a contract from legal. Like, there's a whole bunch of ways that we can move forward with onboarding. But when we kind of set the stage that we're going with proposal, contract, invoice format, that means we've already talked about payment. We've already talked about next steps. We've already talked about how we're going to move forward with this project. And it kind of like is a natural way to kind of onboard your clients. Number 5 here, number 5. So anything that they're going through in the proposal, contract, invoice, you're going to maybe negotiate with them. So you're negotiating maybe your payment terms, or you're negotiating the contract. You might be negotiating the payment itself if they didn't give you a budget. You might be negotiating whether it's ghostwriting or byline, or whether you need to sign an NDA, or you need to edit some other kinds of payment terms or rights terms in the contract. So this doesn't always happen, but negotiating is normal. Like, it's normal for you to send something, and if your client doesn't give you a budget, you pick a number that makes you a little bit nervous and send it away. If that doesn't work for them, there's a lot of clients who will just magically decide they have a budget after you send something. That's not on you. That's on them for not being transparent. So you need to make sure that you're sending your stuff. And if you want to negotiate, you can. Good clients will always negotiate with you. Remember that. Good clients will always negotiate with you. They will negotiate your price. They will negotiate your terms. They will, like, there's nothing in there that's like off the table. They just want to talk about it a little bit more. So you may have to negotiate these things, but good clients make it a fair, it's a fair conversation between equals. It's not like this weird thing where they're like, you can't do that, right? Or like weird stuff like that. So yeah, negotiating is normal. Don't be afraid of it. Treat it as two equals trying to like solve a problem together. Number 6 here, number 6. So you need at least a 50% upfront payment. So I like at least, if I'm doing a project, I get 50% of the project upfront, 50% due 30 days later. So 50% upfront, then I invoice so that 2 weeks from that invoice, I have full payment 30 days later. Does that make sense? So I invoice and they pay that invoice, and then the other half of that money is due 30 days later. Not I don't invoice 30 days later. The money is due 30 days later. So I get a payment, which is half, and then 30 days later, they will complete the other half of that payment. So that for me has worked really well. You can also do 100% upfront. If you're doing a retainer, I like to do 50% of the first month up front, 50% due at the end of the month. Every other month is you invoice by the first of the month. It's due by mid-month. If they don't pay the invoice, don't turn in your work at the end of the month. But for me, you could also do 100% upfront for the month for your retainer as well. I just like to, those two options have really worked well for me. The 50% upfront, 50% due 30 days later for a project where it's X number of deliverables for X amount of dollars. And then the ongoing retainer for 3 to 6 months is, 50% of the first month upfront, 50% due by the end of the month. Every other month you invoice or on the first of the month, and it's due by mid-month. And that way, in case something happens, you don't turn work in, but you're already paid, and they can kind of sort themselves out and pay you, and then you can turn your work in. So it gives you some security in your business. It helps you kind of move up to better clients because you've already secured payment and you have other things that you can focus on. And like, if they don't pay their invoice, then you just don't turn in your work. So it works out so that you're not turning in work, where I've seen writers turn in work where they're like, yeah, the more work I turn in, the more money they owe me, right? Yeah, but they're not going to pay that invoice. Like, stop turning in your work. So you want to be really careful about that. You always want to have some money in your pocket, though, before you start the work. Don't start the work without any money in your pocket, because this is part of that like agreement between you and the client. The client needs to put something in the game for you to get started. So you want to make sure that you don't get burned like I did, where I just started the work and then someone was like, hey, we're not going to continue this, or we're not doing it, and they haven't paid anything and you already started the work. Or what ends up happening is, you have a client who didn't pay you anything, and you're letting them take up brain space or mental space. Those people who have not sent you any money, they get to be orbiters. Okay. So if they haven't sent you any money, if they haven't, like, they've signed a contract and they haven't given you upfront payment, but they set a deadline, they don't exist until they pay that money. And the longer it takes them to pay the money, the further out the deadline goes. They don't get to pay you on Thursday and the deadline is Friday and you turn it in. That's not how this works. So you want to make sure that if someone hasn't paid you, they're just orbiting. They don't get to take up brain space or schedule space. And then once they pay, you can put them in your schedule. Last thing here is kind of like do you or don't you maybe want to? Number 7 is maybe have a kickoff call. I know some writers like to do this where they set up all the stuff and then they have a kickoff call to like talk about the whole project. You could do that if you want. I think that works better when you have a bunch of deliverables, like you have like 5 or 6 deliverables that you're doing over maybe a 3 to 6 month period. That might be a better fit. But if you're having a retainer, usually you're doing kind of repetitive content over a short period, or not a short, but over a period of time. And I think kickoff calls depend on personality. So if you like to have a kickoff call where you can connect with them again and go over the project and go over maybe a timeline or iron anything out, you can do that. I like to include 2 30-minute calls or 1 1-hour call in my contract. That way it's very clear that like, hey, if we do a kickoff call and it's 30 minutes, you have one 30-minute call left to go over anything in this project. Or it also says if you've used all your stuff, if you used either your 1 hour meeting or your 2 30-minute meetings, all other meetings are, $100 an hour. So that way it's very clear that yes, you have meetings included in your contract for a couple things, but if you want a lot of meetings, it costs money. So maybe you have a kickoff call, maybe you don't. It just depends on your personality, how you want to handle the project, how long it is, how many things are in there. So I think for me, when you're starting onboarding, you want to make sure you start this way at the beginning where you're filtering clients. You're filtering people who reach out to you and say, "Hey, I want to work with you." You're filtering people that you're sending LOIs to, and then you're being really specific about your pricing. You're really specific about asking the right questions on calls, and you're continuing to filter, which means you're only onboarding the right people. So this filtering process goes through the whole thing. So you are onboarding, but you're cutting people off the onboarding process as you go through. And I think that's the right way to onboard, because we don't want to just like shove people in and be like, good, you're my client. We want to onboard the right clients, and we want to be very particular about the filtering that we go through in onboarding. So I hope this has been helpful. And the next video that we're going to talk about is effective communication. So this is something where I think there are different communication strategies that we use with clients that are really important in how you talk to them, and what you say, and how to get out of awkward or weird conversations. And there's a lot of things that happen because we work with other people, we work with other teams. So I hope that's going to be helpful as well. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.